I'm going to get us started here. So I'm going to just real quickly say again that we're here to present on how to make conflict a win-win. We may have a few more people join us as we go, and that's fine. We'll incorporate them in as they come in. Lisa Hanson is presenting for us today, and she has her screen up sharing so that she can share some of her PowerPoint presentation with us. We encourage you to use both the chat box or to unmute yourself. If you have questions or things to add to the presentation, we want this to be as interactive as possible. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Lisa.
All righty, thanks, Michael. So our presentation today is how to make conflict a win-win. So I'm Lisa Hanson. I'm the Director of TRIO Student Support Services and Tutoring with Blackhawk College. And my sidekick who will be handling the polls and the chat and just trying to create some other engagement is Michael Gibson, who's our Adult Admissions Advisor. So we welcome you today, and hopefully you'll have some good takeaways for how to increase your conflict confidence and make conflict more of a win-win. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do today is write down the first 3 words that pop in your head when you think of conflict. What are the first 3 words? And if you don't have a piece of paper, you can just keep them handy, but it's always nice to have it, then you can refer back to them later. So the first 3 words. Just going to give you a few seconds to capture those. Hopefully you had time to capture them. So an overview for what we're going to walk through today. We're going to talk about conflict perspectives, behaviors, management steps, styles, and scenarios. So to start us off and get that engagement rolling, we're going to launch our first poll, which is going to guide you to answer, do you think conflict is either harmful or helpful? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through that. It looks like 4 of us noted that we think conflict is helpful, and 2 noted that they think conflict is harmful. So that's just to give you some perspective there. So really, it can be both, right? It can be helpful if it helps us do things in a positive direction. So if it improves understanding of the tasks at hand that need to be done, if it improves team development, so it can actually, bolster dynamics if you work through a conflict, usually if you're on the other end of it and there's been a good resolution. It improves the quality of a decision. So, if everybody jumps on board and says yes, but then it's a bad decision because nobody thought of different perspectives, that might have been a better way to solve a problem. But it can be harmful if there's negative consequences, especially if relationships are impacted in a bad way, so that it creates tension. It can also distract us from immediate tasks, so we're too focused or it's taking too much of an emotional toll so that we're not able to do the business that we really need to take care of. And it can also waste resources on that conflict. So some examples of some costs associated with conflict. There was a study done of employees from 9 different countries, and the average number of hours spent per week, this is per week, on conflict were 0.9 to 3.3 hours. And in the US, the average was 2.8 hours a week. It's kind of a lot of hours to just be focused on conflict, right? The biggest reason for that is employee turnover and absenteeism. So conflict can really affect our stress levels, making us either feel sick or just avoid work altogether. Or leave the job. So these are all things we're hoping to avoid by having our conflict confidence increase, right? So some behaviors and causes which create that turnover and absenteeism. Some behaviors associated with conflict can be bullying. limited communication, not sharing important information, verbal and or physical violence. And some causes can be personality clashes, people just not getting along, right? Stress, heavy workloads, poor upper level leadership, lack of honesty and openness, and unclear roles. And a lot of people have said unclear roles can also be a result of that poor upper level leadership as well. So for our first opportunity to kind of jump into the chat, what behaviors or causes have you observed or experienced related to conflict? What are some things that jump in your head? Limited communication, absolutely. Anyone else? And feel free to unmute if you prefer not to type in chat, but just say. And sometimes limited people moving out of their lanes. Okay, so stepping on other toes or doing things that they weren't supposed to cover. That's that unclear roles kind of thing. Silos. Absolutely. So people feeling like, or they're doing their own decision making, their own tasks without the help or involvement of other people. So it makes everybody feel uncertain or unappreciated, something along those lines. Great examples. So conflict competence, which I've already referred to a few times, is kind of our goal for today. So this is a definition, and because it was worded so well, and I am not a wordsmith, I'm just going to read it to you. The ability to develop and use cognitive, emotional, and behavioral skills that enhance productive outcomes of conflict while reducing the likelihood of escalation or harm. So that's really our goal today, is to increase our levels of conflict competence. So the underlying principles of conflict competence is that conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. Not necessarily, huge conflict is going to happen, but at some point there's going to be a conflict, even if it's, where are we going to dinner? I want to go here. I want to go here. Okay, that's conflict, right? It's positive and or negative consequences that occur depending on how we handle it, what our approach is, how people are feeling, all that kind of stuff. We're better likely to have good results from it if we have active engagement rather than avoidance. When people are avoiding conflict, that's usually how fires end up happening, because we already have those unsettling feelings. And if we don't handle them and have that open communication quickly, it can just lead to a bigger and a bigger escalation, right? Raise your hand whether you do it because your video is on or using our little reactions button, if you've experienced the fires that have happened because conflict was not addressed as quickly as it should have been. Yep. Yep, got everybody. Yep, so we're all in agreement. That's what happens, right? So what you try to do is get people to agree that it's better to deal with it more quickly and create an environment that supports that. People need to be motivated by having that environment and know that there's rewards or less likely negative consequences by dealing with it more quickly. Behavioral, cognitive, and emotional skills can be learned. So we can learn how to address conflict, how to pick up on those cues if we can tell that something's going on for somebody, so that there's a conflict there that we might not even be aware of. So that first step really for those emotional pieces is self-awareness, being aware of our own issues that we're experiencing and chiming in or being able to tell if other people are experiencing things as well. And the environment must be neutral and safe. If people feel like they're in an environment where they can't speak up, the fires won't be, or they won't have that open communication, be able to say that something's going on. Any questions about any of those underlying principles?
I'm not seeing any at this point.
Okay. So we talked about that first step is self-awareness. So remember those 3 words I had you write down or lock in your head? We're going to launch poll number 2 and find out, looking at those 3 words, were they positive, negative, or both for you? right, so it looks like one person was all positive, and then the rest of us had kind of a mixed bag, which means that we already knew that it's harmful and helpful, right? But it's both. I actually had my children take this little quiz, and they were all both. They typically had two that they said were harmful and one that they said was, two that were negative and one that was positive. With a show of hands, whether video or by reactions, were yours more positive? Give me a hands up. All right, John's was? All right, we have 3 that were, so then the other 2 were more negative. So all that means is our first step of self-awareness is that if more of your words were positive, you feel more positively about conflict, which means that you probably will be more open to address it more quickly. If your thoughts are that it's more negative, you're more likely to allow it to escalate because you're more fearful of those negative consequences. Typically, then that's been your experience. So just have that in your mind as you think about conflict and different ways that you can approach it, is that your first thought is that it's negative. And for on the reverse side, if your first thought was positive, that it is something that you feel more positively towards, that there can be that better resolution. So moving on to conflict management steps. The first step is to decide whether to address it. So we talked about, we've all raised our hand that we've experienced conflict where it's escalated and then become much more of a fire. So really whether to address it is this something that is really trivial and doesn't necessarily need to be addressed? It's that whole choose your battles kind of thing. If it's troublesome enough, it's because it's affecting people's behavior or it's weighing on people's conscience, right? Something that keeps you up at night. Either of those 2 things are impacted, you want to make sure that you're addressing that conflict. And it isn't the difficulty of the conversation. A lot of people avoid the conflict because they're afraid of that hard conversation. That shouldn't be part of it. It should just be how is it impacting what's going on? If those impacts are enough, then you need to have that conversation, right? So how do you prepare for the conversation? You have to determine the nature of the conflict. Was it something that happened once, but it just needs to be discussed because it's impacting, because it happened, it's impacting what occurred, right? So you discuss the content of what that one-time thing was. It might have been a fluke thing, but if everybody's acting on, walking on eggshells or something, you just need to address it. Yep, this thing happened. Okay, let's move on, kind of thing, right? If it's a pattern, so it's something that occurs repeatedly, you have to discuss the pattern. So this is what we're seeing. Let's talk about this and let's figure out different ways because it's impacting people's behavior or weighing on people's conscience. If it's impacting relationships, so it used to be that everything, you walked in and everything seemed pretty okay, people were working productively or everyone seemed to be in an okay state, and now you're noticing much more tension, people aren't talking, etc. Then let's talk about the relationships that are impacted and figure out what we can do to get things back to that better state. You have to understand your own position. So what's the background information or data that led up to this conflict? Where did things start to change? You have to know what outcome you're expecting. So when I have this conversation, what am I hoping is going to happen after this? And what do I want to make sure isn't going to happen after this? So it's really important to also figure out what you don't want to occur as part of this resolution, right? What are you willing to give up or compromise? And on the flip side, what are you absolutely not willing to give up and compromise in order to get this conflict resolved? What is your goal or motivation behind this conflict? And what do you think the other party's goal or motivation is? And you should try to figure out what you believe they're wanting, but don't assume, right? It's really important to understand where they're coming from and actually ask them and get that information. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay, seeing head nods or shakes. That's a shake. This is a nod, head nod. So some conflict management tips. It's really important that you're aware of your own emotions and the level of intensity of the conflict. So usually they go hand in hand, right? If you're very emotional about something, it's usually because the intensity is pretty high for that conflict. If you are emotionally charged, often it's best to wait. Usually we can't have a rational conversation if our emotions are too engaged. It's better to put it on pause and wait until we've calmed down. Sometimes it's not possible. That fire has happened, and we just have to deal with it right then. So you can use some calming techniques to make sure your emotions are in check. You can do some deep breathing exercises, some meditation. I think it's pretty powerful that if you concentrate on your heart rate, you can usually get it to lower. Do some deep breathing. Be aware of your fears of the outcome and consequences. So if you're afraid of something that you think could occur from the conflict, it usually will have your emotions escalating. And work through those button pushing behaviors. We all have them, right? So you have to pay attention to your emotions flaring because somebody has pushed one of your buttons. And speaking of those button pushers, these are some typical button pushing behaviors associated with conflict. When people are abrasive, aloof, hostile, micromanaging, overanalytical, self-centered, acting unappreciative, unreliable, or untrustworthy. So going to pull number 3 of these button pushing behaviors, and this one you can answer as many as you'd like. But part of that self-awareness is knowing what those button pushers are for you, because if people push those buttons, you're more likely to become emotionally involved, which can impact how your approach is for a conflict, right? So feel free to click on as many as you feel are correct for you. Seeing lots of clicks coming through. All righty, looks like everybody's answered. So here are our results of what our button pushers are. Looks like abrasive and untrustworthy are the two that hit on everybody the most. Then we fall to hostile when people are really aggressive, right, in our face. Going to micromanaging, self-centered, unreliable, and lastly, overanalytical. So it's just part of that self-awareness is just knowing kind of what are those things that create that emotional response for you. So an important piece is to make sure that you do have a safe environment established in order for that conflict to be in a good place to get it resolved. It's important to ask permission to discuss the topic, not begin with your own conclusion. A lot of times people will approach a conflict by saying, I know you're doing this. And it immediately puts people on the defensive. When people are on the defensive, their emotions increase and typically they turn off the ability to have a rational conversation, which means resolution is probably not going to happen. Establish mutual respect and purpose. So, you know, I'm here, I respect you, here's what we're going to do in this conversation so that we can figure out how to get past this and move on. Ensure it's a private place where nobody else is going to overhear that conversation. The person will feel comfortable being able to sit and have that. And make sure you have enough time. You don't want anyone to feel rushed so they can't really be heard. Discuss that gap between that expected behavior and the observed behavior. So this is the expectation and this is what I'm actually seeing. It's really important that it's facts though, and that you're not making any conclusions or putting things out there that aren't happening, that you haven't actually seen or have some sort of evidence that they're occurring, right? Use I statements. So when I see this, I feel this, instead of just blame statements where you did this. Be aware of your body language. So, you know, are you in their face or are you more sitting back, allowing for the conversation? What's your tone like? Is it an attacking tone or more of a neutral tone? Are you raising your voice because your emotions are starting to happen, or are you staying calm? And keeping those emotions in check is always one of those. Share all the appropriate relevant information, but don't be vague. It has to be exact behaviors. It can't be something so open that they're not really sure what you're asking them not to do or stop doing. Ask open-ended questions to make sure that they can answer, and it can provide the opportunity for them to add any relevant information. And focus on those points of agreement. That common ground is really important so that you can know that you have things that you agree on in order to get through to that resolution piece. Any question on the safe environment pieces? All righty. Moving on to active listening. With active listening, what you're really showing is that mutual respect by really hearing what's going on for somebody and their perspective. And that's an important piece so that resolution can happen, instead of just feeling like you're there to state what's going on and here's the resolution, but that they can be actively involved and heard. So you want to make sure that everybody involved has had the opportunity to state their opinion and perspective on the matter, and then listening respectfully so that you can really come up for an idea for the various options out there for resolution, and all information relevant to the conflict is out there. So asking is discussing the feelings and situation. Mirroring is encouraging people to speak when they're reluctant to do so. Paraphrasing is restating to make sure you've heard them correctly. Sometimes when we hear something, we kind of put our own slant on it. So if we put it back out there based on what we think they've said, it allows for them to state if we're really off base with what the information they've provided to us. You can ask clarifying questions that way as well, so that if you say, oh, it sounds like this, is this really what you mean? Priming. So if the person really is just sitting there not providing any information, you can make a guess as to what you believe their opinion is on it. Sometimes this will prompt them to then share if it's not correct. You have to be really careful though, because you have to make sure you're not jumping to your own conclusions and you're making judgment statements, right? So make sure that you're using, again, that I feel statement, or something where you're saying, it's my understanding that, is that right? So that hopefully you haven't put them on the defensive to increase those emotions. Any questions about any of those active listening pieces? All righty. So moving on to conversation flow. It's really important to define the problem so that you all have come together to decide this is what the problem actually is, after getting all of that information out, and then creating solution options. So they have to be feasible. You have to kind of do that reality check, right? But sometimes if the option is going to be like $1 billion, well, you don't have $1 billion, so it might be the best solution, but there's no way you could actually put it in place. Come to a consensus then on the solution. So you've got your options out there. You want everyone in agreement that this is the best one that will meet everything involved in resolving it. And then create an action plan. So that action plan is always going to be that everybody knows their part in that expectation that's created at the end of the conflict, right? So who's going to do what, when does it need to be done? And then creating those accountability pieces for how to move forward. And it's very important that then you reflect on the ways to prevent similar conflicts, especially if it's a pattern or something that's impacting relationships. You want to make sure that everybody involved has agreed that this is what's going to go on, so that if anything else comes up along the same lines, you can prevent it from happening. Questions about that? Hearing none. So some common mistakes in conflict. People being too friendly before addressing the problem, or softening the message with compliments. So you want to make sure that you're being direct and you're not lightening it by being too fluffy. Inappropriate humor, again, that's almost like being too friendly. You have to make sure that you're keeping it direct and serious. Never ask to guess the reason for the meeting. Now, as a parent, I can tell you that I've done that at times where I say, why do you think I've called you in here? But when it comes to conflict in the workplace or with other adults, probably not the best way, because if they really don't know, you could have them offer something that would open a different can of worms. Using nonverbal hints or subtle comments, so not directly addressing, you want to make sure that people understand why they're there and what the conflict is. If it's too vague, again, you could have people leaving without even understanding what was going on or what that expectation is. And blaming others for the decision or the request being made. So it's important that you have buy-in yourself and that you're respected enough as that authority for dictating how that conversation's going versus saying, oh, well, so-and-so is making me do this. Any questions about that? Hearing none. So now we heard a lot about conflict, how our initial perspectives are for it, some steps and how to address it. We're going to move on to conflict management styles. So it's important to realize that it's rare for people to have the same conflict management style for every conflict that comes up. We tend towards one, but depending on some key pieces involved in the conflict will really be how our approach is. So the things that we tend to use going to which style that we end up utilizing for that conflict is how much we value the person or the issue, our understanding the consequences of the issue, and if we have the necessary time, and really important one, the energy to deal with the conflict, right? So with that, we're going to have everyone take a conflict management style quiz. I will load that in the chat. Oh, I lied. Let me get that loaded in the chat for you here. Okay, does everybody see that in the chat? I guess raise your hand if you don't see it in the chat or have any issue accessing it in the chat. You might have to scroll down a little bit on your screen to get there. So I'm going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes to answer or to take the conflict management quiz. And if you'll just type done in the chat or give me a thumbs up, that way I'll know everybody has taken it. All right, this is up. Thank you. So we're going to launch a poll now. Actually, yep. So if everybody can chime in with what their conflict management style was. All right, it looks like we have almost every single conflict management style that right now in this. So way to represent almost every single style, everyone. I will share my screen again and we're going to walk through those. So the first conflict management style is accommodating. And accommodating typically means that you forsake your needs and desires in exchange for others. It's also known as the yielding style. You're going to put others' concerns before your own. You're going to either give in or be persuaded to give in often. This style is appropriate when you care less about the issue than others. So, you know, everybody wants to go to Chinese and you wanted to have Mexican food, but you're kind of like, yeah, I really don't care. So, you know, you're just like, sure, we'll go there. You want to keep the peace. You feel like you're wrong, or you feel you have no choice but to agree. So that's for that style. So the we're going to just run through an example, and then we're going to talk about the different styles that go through this example. So the example is that Maggie owns a ballet studio, and it's managed by her best friend, Pat. So Maggie's the owner, Pat's the manager. Maggie and Pat usually agree on almost all business-related decisions. However, Pat disagrees with Maggie regarding this job applicant they should hire as the new full-time dance teacher. So as the owner, Maggie has the authority to just say, guess what, Pat, I'm going to do what I want. But she highly values their working relationship and worries about any negative impact for their friendship. They do need to hire someone quickly to begin classes in the next couple of weeks. So as far as the accommodating style, an example of how this particular conflict scenario would be related to the accommodating style is that Maggie would sit down with Pat to discuss a solution. And after she chats with her, Pat feels really strongly about the candidate she believes should have the position, more so than Maggie feels like she feels about her candidate. So Maggie just decides to hire Pat's candidate. So that would be the accommodating style. Does that make sense to everybody? Can you give me a thumbs up? All right, seeing thumbs ups. Good deal. Does anyone have an example they'd like to share where they felt that they used the accommodating style and it was appropriate and went well? You can either put it in chat or take off your microphone, or unmute your microphone if you have an example. All right, hearing none, we will move on to the next one. So the avoiding style evades conflict. This is the absolute opposite of the competing style, which really jumps on board with conflict. And that is the one style that none of us were. So neither pursue their nor others' beliefs, right? They postpone or dodge conflict. This is appropriate when the conflict seems trivial. So again, it's like, I'm not even going to jump on this. This is not the battle I'm going to choose. So whatever, doesn't matter to me. You don't have time or you need more time to think. So it's also taking a time out from having the conflict, right? You can avoid it for a while. You feel you don't have any chance of winning or you're worried about resentment. So the example as far as our scenario goes for avoiding is that Maggie hires Pat's candidate. She's concerned that any disagreement might create resentment in their long-standing working relationship and friendship. So instead of having a conflict, she's just going to go, nope, not as important to me as this relationship. I'm worried about negative impact. I'm just going to hire her candidate. That makes sense to everybody? Give me a thumbs up if it does. All right, it's kind of like Simpson thumbs up, right? All their yellow thumbs up. Does anyone have an example of avoiding where it seemed appropriate and went well? All right, seeing microphones staying on and no videos coming on. And let me see if something's in chat. So John notes, I've read much that avoiding is the most destructive of all types. I think when the stakes are lower, you aren't invested. Absolutely. Yep. So I think avoiding can be helpful, especially if if people are really emotional in the moment. We've heard that don't go to bed mad, but I actually think if you're really mad so that you're not able to say things in a rational or thought-filled way, it's probably better to go to bed and then have the conversation later, right? Or if you're at work and you can tell you're really angry, you might say things that you don't want to have to worry about apologizing for later. So in those cases, I think it is best to avoid it in the moment and then move on. But to John's point, I think this is what can create those fires. People just avoid the conflict like, oh, it's not really there because I don't want to deal with it. And then it's escalated so much so that everybody's impacted and maybe workflow is really off or awful and the environment can really be impacted. Good point. So collaborating, which is often considered the ideal conflict style, and it's because it's really finding a solution that meets everybody's needs. So this is that win-win-win, right? It's appropriate when multiple perspectives need to be addressed. Important when there's a relationship, an important relationship among everybody. The final solution is really too important that nobody can be displeased by it, and all beliefs need to be represented. So this is where you really found a solution that meets everything everybody's looking for. An example for our scenario for the collaborating is that Maggie sits down to discuss the situation with Pat, and she's like, hey, I want this to work well for both of us. They hire their chosen top 2 applicants for a trial period. So they hire two people right away. After several weeks of open communication, they hire the one with the best performance for a full-time position. So that's a collaborative. They worked through it. They've identified their person after allowing both people to kind of show them what they have, right? Everybody good on that one? Give me a thumbs up. All right, seeing my Simpson thumbs ups coming through. Does anyone have an example of this particular style where it's worked well and there's been a good solution that's come through? Let me pull up the chat here to see there. Michael, I think you're the one that posted that you've used this a lot for boards and it's been useful to help deal with issues. Oh, you're muted.
Turned on my video. That doesn't help, does it?
I could tell you were talking.
Particularly, I think in, large decision-making kind of boards that if you don't use collaborating, it can really come back to bite you. You have to kind of make sure that everybody who is ultimately going to be responsible for the decision had some buy-in to it.
Yeah, buy-in's big. Good point. Moving on to our competing style, which is the only style that we didn't have represented here today. This is where you take a really firm stance. You refuse to see other people's perspectives. You push your viewpoint onto others. You reject others' ideas until you get your own way. This, however, is appropriate when you're standing up for rights or morals. You need to make a quick decision and force others on board. So almost the reverse of what Michael was saying for these boards where you have to have that buy-in. You're really forcing that decision on people. Also appropriate when you have to end a long-term conflict. So really just saying, you know what, enough's enough, I'm making this executive decision. Or if you're preventing a terrible or opposing decision, something that you really think will be a hot mess or create a fire later. So an example for our scenario for the competing style is that Maggie feels really strongly about her candidate. She actually knows confidential information about Kat's candidate that she can't tell her. So she just says, hey, you're gonna have to trust me on this one. I need to hire this other person. But Pat does trust her friend and accepts Maggie's candidate as the new hire. So that's where a competing one went well. Thumbs up if that makes sense to people. Fantastic. Simpson thumbs ups coming through. Does anyone have an example on that one? I'll pull the chat up here.
I think that happens, the quick decision piece of that is interesting too. Like if sometimes a conflict situation can force there not to be time to process everybody's point of view.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And John, I just noticed you had said, I think this can lead to no decision if there isn't some leadership or facilitation.
It was actually for the competing or for the collaborating one.
Oh, yes.
But for the competing, I was going to suggest that I think at times a supervisor or somebody maybe that has more information in a short period of time just needs to make a decision. And I'm thinking like in a crisis management situation, for example.
Right. Yeah, if there's a fire, you can't sit there and take a vote, right? It's just get out, get out, get out. That might be a dramatic example, but yeah, I agree with that with collaboration. I think everybody would give me a hands up to say that you've all been to meetings where there's been so much conversation, but you never get anywhere. So it's almost, you can overanalyze something to death and then you haven't made any progress. So very, very good point. And lastly, we have the compromising style. So the compromising style is where you try to find a solution that partially pleases everybody, but really leads to where there's give and take. So usually everybody's gotten something, but somebody's also had to give up something, right? It's appropriate when you have to reach a solution rather than a great one. So it's like, yeah, we just have to figure this out. Your deadline is approaching rapidly, so you have to make that decision, or you're at an impasse and you just need a temporary solution in order to move forward. So this is almost a perfect segue from what we were talking about before, where you're kind of at this stalemate and it's like, we're talking this to death, we just have to make a decision and move on. The example with compromising is that Maggie sits down with Pat to discuss the solution that will please them both. There's some give and take, but it allows them to make a decision quickly. They hire both of the people that they both really, really like, but they split that full-time position into 2 part-time positions. So it's, they kind of both got what they wanted, but they kind of both gave up what they wanted. So instead of that full-time, they had 2 part-timers too. Everybody good with that example, and that one makes sense? Give me a thumbs up. The Simpson thumbs up. I'm going to refer to that forever now. Perfect. We were going to hash through some more conflict scenarios, and I can run through them, or if people have questions, we can walk through those, or if somebody's dealing with something that you'd like to throw out there, we can kind of hash through something like that too. So where would you like to go from here with our last 10 minutes? All right, I will pull up my scenario. So you get off the wrong foot with a coworker. They ask you for help responding to a customer inquiry, but you refuse to lend a hand because you're working on a tight deadline and you don't want to waste time. There's been tension between the two of you ever since, and now you need their help on a project, but they're not being responsive. What do you do? How could you approach that for good impact? So what do we think the issue is with what's occurred? What's the conflict?
I think they probably didn't communicate why they'd said no, and that created some hurt feelings probably.
Right, so it's more of a relationship issue. So for relationship issues, what do you think the best approach is for trying to patch that up? So I will tell you the proposed solution. The proposed solution is to find an appropriate time to walk up and explain that background piece that they might not be aware of, is that you had that tight deadline. And just explaining that if you didn't have that tight deadline, you would have been more than willing to help, and you're willing to help in the future, in the hopes that you've repaired that bridge and then they would then be able to help you. Because in theory, since you work for the same company, if you need their help, they should help you. But we all know that having those healthy relationships is more helpful. Does that seem like an appropriate way to help that conflict? See,
Yes.
my yellow thumbs ups. My Simpson thumbs ups. All right, let's see. Scenario two.
I have a question, if you
Sure.
don't mind.
No, not at all.
I have a conflict that came about last summer with a family member, and whatever the issue was, when we were discussing it, I was kind of floored at their response and how they reacted, kind of defensively and angry. And I thought, okay, we'll just give it a few days. We'll let it, the dust settle. And kind of waited for that person, because I felt they were in the wrong, to apologize or bring it up or talk about the conflict. Never has. And I'm finding, here we are 8 months later, and I'm still frustrated and aggravated. So I feel like I'm avoiding it because I'm like, you did me wrong in the first place. Now you haven't, have the, egg on your face to apologize or anything. But I'm thinking I'm going to have to deal with it because it has affected our relationship. When I'm around this person, I'm just like,
Yeah.
at that.
Right.
I mean, so is there come a point in time, if you have a conflict, that if it's still bothering you 8 months later, you really do need to address it so that it's not simmering below the surface and getting worse?
Yeah, I think so. So going back to that, should you address it? And it says, is it impacting behavior, right? So it sounds like it's impacting that relationship and that you highly value that relationship. So you want that to continue. So it sounds like that should be, based on our research here, that would be one that you would want to address. So then looking at the steps, making sure that it's that respectful, in a respectful place, that neutral environment, safe environment. Maybe that's a way that you could approach it, is just that it seems like this has been impacting our relationship and I highly value this relationship. So how can we get through this and get back to that place, which was much better than we are now?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I feel like if they haven't said anything until now, I'm the one that's got the problem.
Right. It's still weighing on you. That's that weighing on your conscience, and it impacts all those other things. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I hope it helps. Based on all our research, it should. Does anyone else have a question or anything they want to bring up? Or I can go to our next scenario, or we have 5 minutes left. Microphones are staying muted, so I'm thinking we're going on to our next scenario here. Okay. So you're frustrated because your colleague keeps messaging you at 5 a.m. This is a colleague that's in France, so the time is different. There's big time difference. They send you urgent requests and you're sleeping or just waking up and you're sick of being bombarded with 11 requests before you've even sat down. You get the vibe they don't like you very much and you don't know how to approach them. What do we think could be a good way to approach this situation?
So I see part of the disconnect could be how people perceive the use of messaging or emails. So one person could be a person who kind of feels like, I get it, I should deal with it immediately, and um, that's the expectation. And another person could think, I'm doing this while I have time. They'll get to it when they have time. So being able to kind of sit down and be able to have both of those conversations so that people can understand where the frustration or disconnect comes from.
Absolutely. Because to your point, if the expectation of the one person is, yeah, I shoot this off because I have the time, but I really don't expect you to get back to it until you have the time. But the other person feels very much like, because you sent it in this fashion to me, this instant message thing means you expect a response right back. So you're leveling the playing field by making sure the expectation meets the expectation. And it might just be that the person in France forgets that there's a time issue. So just putting it all out there and figuring it out. Anybody else have anything to add on that? All right, so the proposed solution is to find the root of the problem. Is there any particular reason that you're sending me these requests before I'm up? Am I responding to you too late? So again, it's going back to those expectations, exactly like Michael was talking about. That allows you to understand why they're doing it, what their expectation is of you, and also just hash through if the time difference is understood or if that's one of the reasons. Once you know what those expectations are, you can have the conversations put them together. Oh, so then we're also talking about bullying behaviors and why people do that. So I will say, I think bullying behaviors are really, those are probably one of the most tricky conflicts. What was noted is like, I don't understand why people do it. I don't understand why people do it either. Meanness is just not something that's kind of in my bones. I've often thought that if people are using bullying techniques, it's because they're trying to shut down any sort of opposing view. They just really want to get their stuff across. That's like that competing conflict style. And I think if people continue to do it, it's because they, it's worked for them in the past, so then they continue to allow it. So that's kind of my take on that. But at the end of the day, I think that's the trickiest one to try to triage and facilitate. I think often when it's a bullying issue, that usually it does end up in going up the chain to management and moving in HR, unfortunately. So using some of those strategies could help, but often that's one that tends to be so much of a personality clash that you do usually have to get upper levels involved. And then hopefully the upper levels are using the strategies as well so that there can be a good resolution to the issue. Absolutely. Does anyone else, we are at time, so I will just say, in summary, conflict happens, be open, be aware, use these strategies, ask for help if the strategies, aren't working, and try to be proactive to prevent any future issues. Thanks for attending. Hopefully you got to ask your questions and had them answered, or at least in a direction. I do want to let you know that if you go to bhc.edu/go, we do also have a tips for an effective job search going on. Michael, when is the first one? I've forgotten.
Next week, I think.
Next week. So you can also register for that.
Yeah.
Like us on Facebook. And again, I'm Lisa Hanson.
Yep. The 23rd is the job search
Perfect.
one.
So thanks for attending today. Here are our sources. And if anyone has any last minute questions, we can certainly stay for a minute or two. Otherwise, you're free to continue on. I've already stolen a minute more of your day. I apologize.